911?
I just got home and I opened the door and my husband's dead on the floor.
Is he awake?
I don't know. I can't do it. I can't look.
Okay. Can you take a deep breath for me and go in there and see if he's awake? Do you feel like that's something you'd be able to do?
I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it.
Okay.
That morning, I was dispatched to a call of what's called an investigative death. That's where someone dies outside of a doctor's care. And when I showed up at the house, Kelly Baker was sitting on the front steps out of the house. Kelly told me that she had come over to the house expecting her husband, Randy, not to be home and at work. She had gone in the house and had found her husband on the floor, and he was deceased. When I went into the home, I found Randy. He had a little puddle of blood underneath him. I could see Randy's phone, and he had some fast food bag and a drink cup that had spilled from a local restaurant.
He had purchased a meal, it appears, and then fallen on the ground and hit his head.
Kelly told me that Randy was suffering from some serious health conditions, and she thought Randy might have passed away due to some cardio issues.
They announced that there were 2 bullets in Randy's body. One was in his skull, and another had been shot into his chest.
Once we found out that was a homicide, we're really in the dark at this point in time as to who had shot Randy Baker.
I always described him as like a big teddy bear because he was 6'5", like 260 pounds. So to everyone, he seemed very intimidating. But to me, he was so loving. Every night, my entire childhood, we would write notes to each other before bed. So I would leave it on my nightstand and he would switch it. Most of them were about how proud he was of me and I'm gonna love you no matter what. My dad was actually very quiet about his past, but what I do know is once his mom died, he was 18 years old, and that led him down the road of alcohol and drugs. My aunt, Carol, told me she's the one who took him to rehab, and he finally got clean before I was born. And that's when he decided to become a drug alcohol addiction counselor. He graduated with his master's when I was 4 or 5. So growing up, you saw the light in him helping other men. And you could tell it was a huge validation for him and love and passion.
Kelly revealed that they had been married for many years, but now they were separated, and that she was living with a lady named Terry Lager in a town just south of Greeley. But that she would come to the home during the day and operate her hairstylist business that she ran out of the basement.
We walked through the house and asked Kelly if anything looked out of place or if anything was missing. She said there was nothing else in the house that seemed out of place.
But she pointed out that she couldn't find Randy's car that he would have driven home in when he returned home from work.
I contacted his coworkers to see if possibly someone had given Randy a ride home, but was told no, that he hadn't.
They collected video from the treatment center he worked at and found what time he left work.
And then I found the drive-through video from the fast food restaurant, and that showed that Randy had driven himself home.
The restaurant's about a 10-15 minute drive from his house on the other side of Greeley.
And based on the evidence that we have, that Randy likely drove home, went into the home, and was shot and killed.
Do you mind sitting on one of these chairs on the left just because they're recording?
What's always important is when that occasion comes to reveal how he died, to observe and document the reactions of the person you're talking to.
I hate having to go through all this with you, but it's just we're going through everything with a kind of a fine-tooth comb. So, Tuesday, and were you working at that house?
Yes.
All right. And what time did you get out of there?
5:30,
Okay.
5:45 at the latest, and I walked out with my client.
Did you go anywhere? Did you go out at all, or anywhere else
I stopped in that house before I went
before you went home?
to Terry's house,
Okay.
in Sasha.
All right. So you're separated. What was the reason for the separation?
And he was very sick, so, and he's been very sick for a long time. He had cardiomyopathy, and he was diagnosed in 2003. The doctor just gave him 5 years to live, said make the best of it, and that was in 2003. So we're here in 2017. He's been in and out of the hospital several times. Just very weak, very tired, very grouchy. And I would tell him, don't call me a bitch. You know, I'm taking care of you. I'm feeding you. I'm taking care of your clothes, your house, your car. And then I just said at that point, I'm done.
Initially, you're thinking, well, maybe he is grumpy because he's sick or something like that, but she's basically putting her dead husband in a bad light, which is the last thing I think someone in that situation would do. And I was really surprised by that.
Did you have any kind of weapon in the house, firearms, or anything like that? No. Do you own any kind of firearm?
Nope. Okay, so I take that back there. I have 2 9mm and a shotgun, and it's at Cherry's. And I took them out because I was afraid that Randy would do something to hurt me.
Okay. Why? I'm not trying to be rude. Why would you answer that you didn't have any if you had 3?
You're kind of freaking me out. I guess I didn't realize there'd be a lot of questions about my personal life and stuff. Didn't Randy pass away from a heart problem?
There are a lot of questions, and that's why I'm asking you so many, because stuff has come to light since then.
Do I live in a train? Am I in trouble?
Right now, that's what I'm saying. I'm just trying to get information about this, okay?
Okay.
So, like with the guns, I'd rather have you just be honest with me instead of lying to me about it.
Sorry.
Okay?
Yeah.
In this county, it's more often than not expected that you have guns. And so a question like that is innocuous. And yet, for some reason, Kelly opted to initially deny that there were any firearms.
And you said you took them because you were concerned that he would do something to you or him or both, or what were you thinking?
Both. I mean, he had made the statement that he would, if he ever found out I was with somebody, he would kill me then and himself.
Okay. And since the split, have you started seeing anybody or anything? Do you know if Brandy started seeing anybody?
I do not.
Okay. just wait here for a second? Sure. Do you need to use the bathroom or coffee or water or anything?
Kelly? Hi, I'm John. How are you? John. Just a quick introduction. I'm a detective at the police department. Just have a bunch of stuff to follow up on with a car missing and those types of things. His phone can offer some answers to us. And what I'm asking you as the person who pays the bill on this phone and kind of the owner of this phone is if you would consent for us to go through this phone. Okay? Would you allow us to do the same with your phone?
I have a question. I'm a little freaked out on why. Are you guys arresting him?
No, you're not under arrest. We're doing an investigation. Okay? You're not under arrest.
I'm just, sorry, I don't.
I understand, but okay, and I want to explain to you. The coroner has ruled that the manner of Randy's death is a homicide.
To me, he was my protector. He always tried to tell me, like, I am proud of you. And I just remember he would call me at least once a week and be like, life's hard, Betty, but you're amazing. Like, I am so proud of you. Ugh. In days when my husband and I are fighting and arguing about something stupid, I would call him and he'd be like, well, this is marriage. He just always spoke to my heart, and that's what I miss. Being a mom and a wife's really hard, but he made me feel like I could do anything.
Okay, your husband is a victim of a homicide. Okay, so that is why I'm asking a lot of tough questions right now, and that is why I'm going to ask you for your phone. Okay, so I'm sorry to be the person that has to tell you that. However, sometimes it's not the fun part of my job, but it's what we do.
She appeared to start crying. However, Detective John Kinney would notice no tears. I was extremely suspicious of her at that point.
Do I have to continue? Do I have to keep going?
I can't force you to do anything, okay? Kelly, the reason that I want to ask you these questions is because I think that you could provide some insight to who did this to him. Yeah. Is there anything, Kelly? Take as many as you need and wait plenty more.
I will try.
So I know you don't want to answer the question about if you've been seeing anyone or doing anything like that. Eventually, someone says something and we figure out who it is. So, is there someone?
Yeah, Carrie's brother.
Okay, so is Clint part of the reason for your breakup? So what happened after? Okay, I'll be right back.
It just seemed like she was telling a lot of small lies that she didn't need to. That raises big red flags when you're investigating a case. It leads one to think, what else hasn't she been truthful about?
You can go. Do you know when answering on some of the follow-up questions I have? What's that? Okay. All right, well, we can certainly follow up. We can certainly do that. I will tell you this, as part of the investigation, I'm going to seize your cell phone. You can't have it. All right, we'll be taking it. And we'll ask her to slow down into it.
She's really apprehensive about Detective Kinney taking her cell phone.
She essentially just shoved it across the table.
There are things that aren't adding up. We were all wondering if she was in fact involved.
It's a long day, and then we've done a lot. Okay, I'll be in touch, and once we get the phone done, I'll be able to do that to you.
It may pan out down the road that Kelly has nothing to do with this. But she's raising her hand saying, look at me as a suspect, and we need to clear her of any wrongdoing.
Carol said that she had been in the house the night before as she cared for the dog while Randy was at work, but had left prior to Randy coming in.
We were hoping Carol Baker gives us insight into what happened to Randy Baker.
Shake your hand. My name's Mike. The reason we asked you to come down is one, we just wanted to check in with you, see how things are going. But for the most part, it's kind of a whodunit, quite honestly. Until the evening of Tuesday, August 15th. Do you have any recollection what time you left the house?
I went over there at 6:30 and I was there 5 minutes at the most. I just went in there, got the laundry, put the dog away, and then that was it. I always helped out with everything with my brother being sick, and
This is 6:35, 6:40. Where'd you go from there?
went over to my aunt's house. Not very far from there. Mainly handicapped, and I spent the night with her.
Did you see anybody suspicious in the neighborhood? Did you see any cars?
No,
Okay.
but I was in a hurry to get back because, I didn't want to leave her too long.
All right. Did the door stay open while you were in the house?
No, I'm not positive. But since I got older, I can't remember things.
Part of this investigation is looking at cell phones, so I'm going to have to take your cell phone. I'm sure Kelly told you we took her just for a little while. You're just next in line, that's all.
Yeah.
Carol was, by all appearances, extremely helpful in answering any questions with law enforcement. At this point, we have no indication that she was involved, but let's not turn our backs on anyone. At this point in time, the entire city of Greeley is a potential suspect.
You got a car?
Yeah.
They learned that both Carol and Kelly deleted their cell phone text history the day that Randy Baker's murdered. But even if it's deleted, a lot of times things are still on there.
In the coming days, we would recover a lot of cell phone data. What I'm finding is Carol and Kelly had an extremely close connection. It was astronomical, the number of text messages exchanged between the two in any given day. and they would disparage Randy. Carol helped support Kelly's hatred, and these two little hens would just bicker about Randy, and it was upsetting. I was struck by a couple of their text messages. Around the end of July, Carol sent a phone number to Kelly.
And that phone number comes back to a person named Kelly Raisley, who goes by the moniker Grizz. And it turns out Kelly Raisley is Carol Baker's son.
I learned that he had recently ended a prison sentence in Greeley and was out of custody, living in the Denver metro area. There was conversations just outright, without hiding his name.
There's comments like, yes, he'll do it. I promise you he'll do it. Talks of he'll do it for $10,000 or a Harley Davidson.
There was discussions showing that Grizz was coming up to Greeley to collect the motorcycle after Randy was killed.
There's a ton of evidence pointing towards his involvement in the conspiracy to commit murder. It appears he was intimately involved in this homicide, and Kelly and Carol were behind all this. I've never seen anything like it where someone's own sister and wife conspire to kill him and get his nephew to do it.
It was huge, but I was still lacking in certain evidence that Grizz was our actual trigger man. It was frustrating at that point. Finding Randy's car was one of the top priorities for the investigation to see where we would go to next. We tracked those individuals down and spoke with them, and they revealed to us that a guy named Mark Raisley had given them the car on the night of the murder. And when they discovered through media accounts that the car was connected to a homicide, they dumped it in the location where we recovered it.
So they looked into him, and turns out Mark Raisley, when you look at his family lines, is Carol Baker's nephew. It was a big break in the case. When we learned Mark Raisley had it, we were trying to link, well, how did Mark Raisley get it? Mark Raisley said that the night of the murder, Randy's car was parked in front of Carol Baker's house, and Carol Baker was texting Mark Raisley, get rid of it either on Facebook or at a chop shop, but you just needed to get rid of the car.
And Mark Raisley said Grizz wanted Randy's car burnt. I believed him when he said it. Mark Raisley was helpful in answering any questions. At this point, I believe Grizz murdered Randy at the direction of Kelly and then took the car to his mom, and Carol Baker helped get rid of all the evidence. Now, I had to prove this. Hi, Carol. Couldn't have a seat. I devised the plan and I created a fake photo array. In this photo array, her son has been placed in position number 2.
We're hoping Carol would think that Kelly Baker came in and said her son did it. If she felt like Kelly Baker double-crossed her, then she's going to just give up the whole story then and probably blame Kelly Baker more than anyone else.
We went into the interview room, and I'm orchestrating this puppet show, and unfortunately forgot to turn on the video in the room, but I had my redundant backup audio recording going the entire time. So like Chris told you, we wanted to show you a photo array. We talked with Kelly quite a while, so I want to see if you recognize anyone in this array.
My son.
Okay, and what position is he in?
2.
Okay, and what's his name?
Kelly.
So when Carol looks at this array, she sees her son. She was clearly shocked. Her eyes grew wider. Her mouth twitched. Did you see him at all the day Randy was killed?
No, he was going to work in Wyoming the last I heard.
What time did he have to get to Wyoming on August 15th?
I don't pay attention to that stuff.
The day Randy died, didn't call you, text you, anything like that?
No.
What's his relationship with Randy?
Nephew.
But I mean, what's it like?
They were really close. I mean, his whole life, Randy was his idol.
Did he come to the funeral?
No. I don't even know if he knows it.
Oh, really? You never reached out to him to tell him that a guy he loved died?
I couldn't find him.
Oh,
You know,
wow.
there's no number. I have no number, no nothing.
Okay. How long had Randy owned that Pontiac, the car?
Quite a while.
Why was it at your house an hour after he died?
It was.
So it would have been, what, 50 minutes, 50 minutes after Randy probably died?
No.
Who's Mark Raisley?
My ex's brother's son.
Do you talk to Mark?
Not very often.
Mark Raisley said you texted him the night Randy was murdered and asked him to come pick up the car and get rid of it.
No.
You didn't tell him, too bad you don't know where a chop shop is. Now, there's a lot of stuff we know, quite honestly, Carol, so I'm just hoping that you're telling me the truth instead of being scared and not wanting to tell me the truth. Did Kelly Raisley come to your house in that car? She doesn't respond, but she nodded her head. And now I'm just going to keep throwing the questions as quick as I can to see how far she'll go. And so what did he say exactly, Kelly?
He goes, I took this car, but I don't want it.
Did Kelly tell you that they wanted the car burned?
He might have.
And did you ask him, why do you have Randy's car?
Said, how'd you get this?
Why wouldn't you tell me all this?
Kid.
Your kid? You're trying to protect him. Mama bear. I get it.
Done it for his whole life.
But he killed your brother.
But I didn't know it. Suspected everything.
When she started to confess, I just wanted to keep it going for as long as she's willing to let me, to get evidence further implicating Kelly and Grizz and exploiting just how deep she was in this conspiracy. Why did you wipe your phone clean?
I don't even know.
You know, the funny thing about cell phones, even though you press delete, a lot of stuff stays inside of them. And in Kelly Baker's phone, a lot of the stuff she deleted stayed there. She's your best friend. She tells you everything. You exchanged 4,500 text messages with Kelly Baker from June 1st up to the murder. She discussed murdering Randy with you. Why would she do this? Why would she kill him? Wait for him to die.
She has been for 14 years.
And she just didn't want to wait any longer?
So he was unbelievable to live with.
So in July, when she's planning this murder, is she meeting with Kelly Raisley? Is she...
Not in front of me.
When we were in the room watching it live, one of the other officers looked up and said, the light's not on. It's recording sound, but not picture. So one of the other officers quickly turned on the video.
Who was with Kelly in the house when he murdered Randy?
Nobody was there.
Just Kelly.
Had to be just Kelly.
Well, you know, when we've been talking, you know that they planned this out. You said that, right?
Mm-hmm.
You didn't shoot your brother.
No.
But how do you know Kelly Raisley was alone in the house when he murdered Randy?
Just was.
Was he in the house, Randy Baker's house, when you left?
No. He was, I didn't see him.
You remember one time in a text message you sent to Kelly Baker that you fantasized about Randy sitting in his home alone when somebody broke into the house through the back door, and he would just sit there and scream like a little girl? Remember saying that? I guess my questions now are kind of, what role did you play in Randy's murder? Did you play a role? When you passed messages from Kelly Raisley and Kelly Baker, you knew they were planning the murder, right?
I think I need an attorney.
You do? Okay. Well, you're under arrest for first-degree murder and conspiracy to first-degree murder. You're going to be processed, transported to the Weld County Jail, booked in. You have a no bond warrant. You'll be seeing a judge, I would assume, sometime tomorrow. And we'll move on from there. Thanks for your time.
I had some concerns that Carol might not give up as much information as she did, but Detective Prill's interview techniques led to her talking, and she gave us a lot of information that helped the case.
When Kelly was transported back to the police department, I wanted Kelly to actually walk past Carol in the interview room.
We wanted to see what Kelly's reaction would be.
They locked eyes. They both saw each other and realized now that both of them are in custody for this. So I'm leaving both sides to believe that the other gave them up. Now we switch Carol out and put Kelly in the room.
Hey, Kelly. Spoke with Cheryl for quite a while.
I advise her of her legal rights, just to see if she's willing to talk. She had two options: give me more lies or confess.
Having these rights in mind, you wish to speak with me now. Okay. You want an attorney present? That's what you said. Okay. You're under arrest for first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder for the murder of Randy Baker, your husband. Okay. Well, you can prove that in court.
I didn't care. It didn't hurt the case.
Stand up for me.
You don't have anything to say. See you later. So now we have Kelly Baker, Carol Baker, and Kelly Raisley in custody for this. But an arrest does by no means halt the investigation. We are seeking justice, and we continue to collect vast amounts of evidence proving their guilt.
Months later, Kelly Raisley ended up sending me a few letters. And it's clear he wants to talk to me and provide information on what happened.
And so we arranged with his attorney that if he tells the truth, The only benefit he would receive is that we would not pursue the death penalty. He's a big guy. He's a killer. My concern is this entire setup is a means for him to either attack Chris or I, or hoping for a chance to escape. So I laid out the room in such a way to put barriers up in case that was something he did.
Kelly?
But I'm laid back and casual with him because he asked for this. It was an opportunity for me to have a lot of unanswered questions finally answered.
Were you approached ultimately and talked about what you'd be paid for doing this?
Yeah, I was approached through my mom, but it was via Kelly will give you the $10,000
Okay.
and Randy's a motorcycle.
And so how do you know specifically that Kelly Baker wanted your help in killing Randy?
Paraphrasing, it'd be that she couldn't take it anymore, that it was basically either him or her, and she was willing to do anything
To kill him?
to get rid of him. She made it look like she was, the victim. I said, well, don't worry about it, I'll take care of it.
He said that he was very, very close to Randy growing up. He was the only father figure Grizz ever had. But these two women convinced him that Randy was abusive. And then with eerie, almost fascinating detail in this quiet room, Grizz detailed the murder of Randy from start to finish.
How did you get to the Baker house that day? Okay. Did she accompany you to the house?
No.
Did she leave?
Yeah.
What were you going to do?
Sharon. And then make it look like a suicide. But I didn't hear the garage door open because it's raining, and something my peripheral vision got.
And what happened?
I had the little 22 in my hand already, and just from the film, the way I was feeling there, and I spun and fired.
You said in the letter, it's important to you to relate, I think, through me, that whether or not he suffered.
No, he was, when he fell, when he collapsed, he was, to my knowledge, he was unconscious.
Okay.
My mom became trapped in the middle of whatever she was being fed from Kelly. Like, I feel like I got played.
Did these ladies think they were going to get away with this?
Apparently, yeah. And I decided, they were defiant. It actually, the way I intended it to say it was 13 minutes. I kind of started to panic a little bit because I seen the garage door was open. And so I was like, I'm just going to get out of here. And so then I took the car over to my mom. And then she goes, well, how did you do it? So I didn't know what to tell her. And I said, you want to know? Because honestly, I'm kind of pissed. Because I've been put in I feel like I've been put in a bad spot anyway.
Sure.
And then she says, go around, and then I tell her. Exactly.
And what's her response to that?
I think I'm going to be sick. Which, that's why I left pissed out.
No, she makes it sound like you did something.
You turned me into the animal, but you're the one that's pushing it. Because I could have just stayed in G6 and left completely and just came back from the stolen ride. But it was more of a kind of a you're getting your hands dirty.
So you made that decision from the house to get your mom involved. Interesting. So ultimately, how much were you paid?
It had been 13 and a bike.
And the bike.
Obviously, Grizz's confession was massive, but I think every interview, especially in this case, big or small, produced evidence that was necessary for the ultimate arrest and conviction.
Kelly Raisley pled guilty to first-degree murder and got sentenced to life without parole. Carol Baker pled guilty to conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. She received 30 years in prison. And Kelly Baker was made no offer. We tried her. She was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and is serving life without parole in the prison.
Anybody who could orchestrate another person's death, especially utilizing somebody's own family member, is a psychopath. I'm thrilled to know that Kelly Baker will never see daylight again as a free person, nor her nephew, and nor will Carol.
Justice has definitely been found in the realm of crime and punishment. But Randy Baker's daughter woke up this morning without her dad. So, in that sense, there is no such thing as justice. But ultimately, we recovered Randy's motorcycle, and we were able to bring that bike back to Betty. And that was huge for me.
It was almost like the book was closed. They were all in prison, but he was coming home with me a little bit. It's in our garage, and I'll go when I miss him and just sit on it and talk to him. My youngest was sitting on his motorcycle the other day, and I'm like, God, he would have been so happy to see like one of his grandchildren on his motorcycle just loving life. And I found like peace in it. Like, Dad, you like raised me, and now I'm raising 4, almost 5 other little kids like that might not have got to know you, but they know you.
The forest had already swallowed the sound. By the time the first deputy stepped between the towering pines, the morning breeze carried nothing but the smell of damp earth and rotting leaves. Birds still sing overhead, oblivious to the horror hidden beneath their branches. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in scattered beams, illuminating patches of moss like spotlights on a stage no one wanted to stand upon. At first glance, the clearing appeared untouched, another forgotten corner of the wilderness where time moved slower than the outside world. Then someone looked down. Everything changed. One moment it was an ordinary search. The next, it became a crime scene that would haunt investigators for generations. The victim was young, far too young. Her name was Deborah Tomlinson. She had dreams, routines, people waiting for her to come home. Instead, she became the center of one of the most enduring mysteries in American criminal history, a case that would survive changing detectives, advancing forensic science, fading memories, and decades of unanswered questions. Long after newspaper ink faded and television cameras packed away, one question refused to disappear. Who killed Deborah Tomlinson? For the people living nearby, that question became more than a headline. It became a warning whispered to children walking alone, a reason to lock doors before sunset, a reminder that monsters did not always lurk in distant cities or dark alleys. Sometimes they hid behind familiar smiles. Sometimes they blended effortlessly into ordinary neighborhoods, attending church on Sundays, waving to neighbors, exchanging polite greetings at grocery stores while carrying secrets too terrible to imagine. The terror did not begin in the forest. It began hours earlier, when nobody realized they were witnessing the final ordinary moments of a teenage girl's life.
There was nothing dramatic about that day.
No sense of impending tragedy. No ominous clouds gathering overhead. No sudden silence from nature hinting that evil was waiting just beyond the tree line. Everything seemed painfully normal. Normal enough that nobody thought twice. Normal enough that nobody remembered every detail until it was already too late. When Deborah disappeared, the first reaction was disbelief. Teenagers changed plans. They stayed with friends. They forgot to call home. Parents worried, then sighed with relief when explanations eventually surfaced. That was how these stories usually ended. But this story refused to follow the familiar script. Hours turned into panic. Panic transformed into urgency. Telephones rang from one household to another. Friends were questioned. Relatives searched roads and neighborhoods. Cars crawled through nearby streets as drivers scanned sidewalks, bus stops, parking lots, and open fields. Nothing. No sign of struggle. No abandoned belongings. No witness who could confidently say where she had gone. As daylight faded, fear spread faster than facts. The sheriff's office organized volunteers. Flashlights pierced the darkness. Boots crunched across dirt trails. Searchers shouted Deborah's name into the endless woods, waiting for a voice to answer. Only echoes returned. Every minute that passed reshaped the investigation. Missing. Endangered. Possibly abducted. Those words carried increasing weight as detectives assembled the first timeline. Every confirmed sighting became precious. Every uncertain memory suddenly mattered. Investigators collected names, addresses, descriptions, license plate numbers, anything capable of shrinking an expanding universe of possibilities. Yet almost immediately, something felt wrong. People remembered seeing Deborah. People remembered talking to her. People remembered where they had been. But the timeline refused to connect. Small gaps appeared between verified events. Tiny windows of missing time. Minutes. Perhaps less than an hour. Somewhere inside those missing moments, a predator made his move. Experienced investigators often say that the first 48 hours determine the future of a homicide investigation. Witnesses remember details before memories fade. Physical evidence remains uncontaminated. Tire tracks stay visible. Footprints survive rain. Surveillance, if any exists, has not yet been erased. In Deborah's case, time became the enemy almost immediately. The wilderness was beautiful. It was also merciless. Wind erased traces. Rain softened impressions. Animals disturbed evidence. Every passing hour quietly worked on behalf of whoever committed the crime. When search teams eventually reached the location where Deborah was found, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Conversations stopped. Radios fell silent. Deputies exchanged glances that required no words. This was no accident. This was murder. Crime scene tape stretched across the clearing as investigators documented every inch of ground. Photographers captured hundreds of images before anything was moved. Detectives crouched beside disturbed soil, examining broken branches and flattened vegetation. Every snapped twig became a possible clue. Every footprint demanded measurement. The forest itself seemed unwilling to reveal what had happened. No obvious murder weapon lay nearby. No handwritten confession. No miraculous fingerprint waiting on an untouched surface. Only fragments. Tiny, stubborn fragments. A fiber caught against rough bark. An impression in soft earth. Marks that suggested movement. Evidence that hinted at violence without identifying the person responsible. Forensic science was entering a new era, but it remained limited compared with what modern investigators take for granted. DNA profiling, which would later revolutionize criminal investigations worldwide, was not yet the powerful tool it would become. Detectives relied heavily on interviews, physical evidence, intuition, and persistence. Persistence would soon be tested beyond anything they imagined. News traveled rapidly. Before long, television stations interrupted programming. Radio broadcasters repeated developing updates. Newspapers rushed extra editions to print. Teenage girl found dead. Community in shock. Police searching for killer. Parents across the county reacted instinctively. Children who once rode bicycles until dusk suddenly heard their names shouted from front porches. Come home. Playgrounds emptied earlier. Curtains closed sooner. Ordinary routines quietly disappeared. Every unfamiliar vehicle became suspicious. Every stranger attracted nervous attention. Fear settled over the community like an invisible fog. The investigation expanded. State investigators joined local authorities. Detectives worked around the clock, interviewing classmates, co-workers, neighbors, relatives, acquaintances, anyone whose path might have crossed Deborah's during her final day. Questions repeated endlessly. Did she mention meeting someone? Was she upset? Did she seem frightened? Did anyone notice a strange car? A man watching? An argument? The answers created stacks of reports, but little certainty. Witnesses rarely lie with malicious intent. More often, memory simply changes. People confuse days, misjudge time, blend separate events into one. Detectives knew this. Still, buried somewhere within thousands of statements could be one overlooked observation capable of exposing a murderer. So they kept asking. Again. And again. And again. Some interviews lasted minutes. Others stretched for hours. Certain individuals voluntarily returned multiple times, remembering one additional detail after another. A color. A direction. A face that seemed oddly familiar. Most leads collapsed almost immediately. Others consumed precious days before ending in disappointment. Meanwhile, another enemy quietly emerged. Rumors. Someone claimed Deborah had argued with an acquaintance. Someone else insisted they saw a suspicious truck. Another person swore a drifter had been camping nearby. Each rumor spread faster than verified information. Each forced investigators to separate imagination from evidence. Every false lead stole time. Every mistaken identification diverted manpower. Every anonymous phone call promised a breakthrough before collapsing under scrutiny. Still, detectives could not afford to ignore any possibility. Because once, just once, a seemingly insignificant tip might reveal the truth. Inside the evidence room, shelves gradually filled with labeled boxes. Photographs. Maps. Interview transcripts. Laboratory requests. Collected clothing. Trace materials carefully sealed inside envelopes. Each item represented hope. Together they formed a puzzle, missing its central piece. Investigators reconstructed Deborah's known movements with painstaking precision. Where she had been. Who saw her. What time she left. Which route she likely traveled. The timeline grew increasingly detailed until it reached the same impossible point. Then. Nothing. Silence. An empty stretch where certainty disappeared. Whatever happened next occurred beyond the view of every confirmed witness. That absence became the killer's greatest ally. The autopsy answered some questions while creating many more. Medical examiners documented injuries with clinical precision, searching for patterns capable of revealing motive, sequence, or method. Violence leaves signatures. Sometimes those signatures identify offenders. Sometimes they expose planning, panic, opportunity, or personal rage. But not always. Certain findings narrowed possibilities. Others broadened them. Some details investigators intentionally withheld from the public, believing only the killer would know them. That decision reflected experience. False confessions appear in nearly every notorious murder investigation. Individuals seeking attention, suffering mental illness, or chasing notoriety often insert themselves into major cases. Separating fantasy from fact became another exhausting responsibility. Calls flooded police headquarters. Psychics claimed visions. Anonymous letters arrived. Self-proclaimed eyewitnesses emerged weeks after the crime. Every claim demanded evaluation. Most dissolved almost instantly. Yet detectives remained cautious. Because buried beneath 100 lies might exist one overlooked truth. The press intensified pressure. Reporters camped outside police offices. Microphones followed detectives to parking lots. Editors demanded updates. Television anchors repeated the same question night after night. Has the killer been identified? The answer remained painfully consistent.
No.
Behind closed doors, frustration mounted. Veteran investigators reviewed evidence repeatedly, convinced they had overlooked something obvious. Maps covered conference room walls. Colored pins marked witness locations. Strings connected timelines. Names circled in red appeared promising before being crossed out days later. Suspects emerged. Suspects disappeared. Alibis held. Evidence contradicted theories. Nothing survived long enough to become certainty. The forest, meanwhile, remained unchanged. Rain continued falling. Leaves continued growing. Visitors unknowingly walked paths only yards away from where one of the region's darkest crimes had unfolded. Nature erased scars far more efficiently than human memory. But memory never vanished completely. Not for Deborah's family. Not for investigators. And certainly not for the person responsible. Somewhere beyond the headlines, beyond the search parties and flashing police lights, one individual woke each morning carrying knowledge no one else possessed. Whether hidden behind confidence or buried beneath fear, the truth existed inside a living mind. Every newspaper article, every television report, every public appeal carried the same silent message. We're still looking. We're getting closer. And one day, no matter how many years have passed, the past may come knocking at your door. As investigators settled into the relentless rhythm that defines every major homicide inquiry, the case entered a phase far less visible than the dramatic images captured by television cameras. The flashing lights disappeared from the evening broadcasts, but inside interview rooms, evidence lockers, and forensic laboratories, the search for answers continued with unwavering intensity. Every document was reviewed, every statement compared against another, every confirmed movement placed onto an expanding timeline that investigators hoped would eventually expose the single inconsistency capable of identifying the person responsible. The challenge was immediate and formidable. A homicide investigation rarely succeeds because of one dramatic discovery. More often, it advances through hundreds of ordinary observations that gradually form a coherent picture. Detectives reconstructed Deborah Tomlinson's known activities with meticulous care, seeking to determine not only where she had been, but who had the opportunity to encounter her during the critical period before her death. Friends, acquaintances, relatives, and members of the community were interviewed, many more than once, as investigators attempted to separate reliable recollections from assumptions shaped by hindsight. Memory, however, is rarely as precise as people believe. Hours after a traumatic event, witnesses often feel certain about details that later prove inaccurate. Days become blurred. Times are estimated rather than remembered. Conversations merge together. Investigators understood these limitations and approached each interview with cautious skepticism, recognizing that even sincere witnesses could unknowingly introduce errors into the investigation. As the number of interviews increased, detectives began comparing independent accounts rather than relying on any single statement. Where 2 witnesses agreed, confidence grew. Where 3 contradicted one another, additional questions followed. Maps covered conference tables. Handwritten notes filled margins of investigative files. Seemingly insignificant details, a vehicle noticed along a roadside, an unfamiliar face, an unusual sound, were cataloged because experience had taught investigators that minor observations sometimes become critical months or even years later. At the same time, Forensic specialists examined the physical evidence recovered from the scene using the scientific methods available during that era. Modern audiences often imagine DNA providing immediate answers, yet homicide investigations from previous decades were conducted under very different technological limitations. Investigators relied heavily on trace evidence, fingerprints when available, pathology findings, fiber examinations, and the careful interpretation of the crime scene itself. Every recovered item was documented, preserved, and evaluated with the expectation that future scientific advances might someday reveal information that contemporary methods could not. That possibility would become increasingly important as the years passed. Public interest remained intense. Local newspapers continued reporting developments whenever authorities released new information, though investigators deliberately withheld certain details from public view. This practice remains common in homicide investigations because undisclosed facts can later help distinguish genuine knowledge from fabricated confessions. When investigators possess information known only to the offender and those directly involved in the investigation, that information can become an important tool during future interviews or prosecutions. The flow of information into the investigation never stopped. Telephone calls arrived from members of the public offering observations, suspicions, and theories. Some callers believed they had seen something unusual around the time of Deborah's disappearance. Others suggested individuals they considered suspicious for reasons that ultimately proved unrelated to the crime. Every credible lead required evaluation. Most were eliminated through routine investigative work, but none could be dismissed without consideration. Detectives also examined whether Deborah's death might be connected to other reported crimes in the region. Establishing links between separate investigations is an essential part of homicide work, particularly when circumstances appear similar. Investigators compared available information, looking for recurring patterns involving victim selection, geographic location, or methods used by an unknown offender. Such comparisons are often complicated by incomplete records, differing investigative jurisdictions, and the simple reality that not every apparent similarity reflects an actual connection. Even so, exploring those possibilities remained an important component of the investigation. As weeks became months, the practical realities of a major investigation began to emerge. Active leads gradually declined. New information arrived less frequently. Detectives continued reviewing evidence while balancing responsibilities for newer cases demanding immediate attention. Yet, unresolved homicides occupy a unique place within law enforcement. They are never considered finished merely because time has passed. Files remain preserved. Evidence is retained whenever possible. Investigators recognize that advances in science, renewed public attention, or an unexpected witness can alter the trajectory of a case many years after the original crime. For Deborah's family, however, the passage of time carried a different meaning. Every holiday, birthday, and family gathering became another reminder of an absence that could never be explained through ordinary grief. Families affected by unsolved homicides often describe a form of loss unlike any other. Mourning becomes intertwined with unanswered questions. Hope coexists with uncertainty. The desire for justice remains present long after public attention has shifted elsewhere. Communities experience a similar transformation. Cases that remain unresolved gradually become part of local memory, passed from one generation to the next as cautionary stories and enduring mysteries. New residents learn the names through newspaper archives and conversations with longtime neighbors. Veteran investigators retire, while younger detectives inherit files assembled long before they entered law enforcement. Each new review begins with the same objective: determine whether overlooked evidence, improved technology, or a fresh perspective can reveal what earlier investigations could not. History has demonstrated that such persistence sometimes succeeds. Numerous cold cases once considered unsolvable have later been resolved through advances in forensic science, renewed witness cooperation, or the careful re-examination of evidence preserved for decades. Those developments transformed investigative expectations across the United States, encouraging agencies to retain physical evidence and periodically revisit major unsolved cases. Whether the passage of time conceals the truth or gradually exposes it depends on circumstances unique to every investigation. Physical evidence may deteriorate, memories inevitably fade, and witnesses become increasingly difficult to locate. Yet time can also work against an offender. Relationships change. Secrets become harder to carry. Scientific methods improve. Evidence, once thought insignificant, acquires entirely new value under modern examination. For investigators connected to Deborah Tomlinson's case, that possibility remained central. The objective never changed, even as years accumulated. Establish the facts. Follow the evidence wherever it leads. Distinguish verified information from speculation. Preserve every item that future science might one day unlock. Those principles, more than dramatic breakthroughs or sensational headlines, define the painstaking reality of homicide investigations and explain why some cases continue to command attention decades after the crime itself. The investigation had entered a quieter chapter, but it was far from over. Behind the orderly rows of archived files rested evidence, waiting for another examination, another question, another technological advance. Somewhere within the documented facts, not rumor, not assumption, but verifiable evidence, investigators believed the truth still existed, waiting for the moment when scattered fragments would finally align into a complete and unmistakable picture. Years have a way of changing almost everything. Streets are widened, businesses close, neighborhoods evolve, and generations grow up with little memory of the headlines that once dominated the front page. Yet within law enforcement, certain case files resist the passage of time. They are revisited not because investigators expect an easy answer, but because experience has repeatedly shown that unresolved homicides can change course when viewed through the lens of new evidence, new technology, or simply a fresh set of eyes. Deborah Tomlinson's case became one of those enduring investigations. The original reports, photographs, diagrams, laboratory findings, and interview summaries were preserved with extraordinary importance. Every document represented a snapshot of the investigation at a specific moment in time. While theories naturally evolved as additional information emerged, the underlying evidence remained constant. Detectives understood that opinions might change, but documented facts would continue to provide the foundation for every future review. Cold case investigations differ fundamentally from active homicide inquiries. Rather than responding to rapidly unfolding events, investigators begin by questioning assumptions made years earlier. They compare witness statements collected at different times, searching for inconsistencies that may have seemed insignificant during the original investigation. They ask whether overlooked evidence could now be examined using modern forensic techniques. They reconsider individuals who had once been interviewed and eliminated, not because prior investigators necessarily made mistakes, but because new information can alter the context in which earlier evidence is understood. This methodical process requires patience above all else. Contrary to popular portrayals, cold case detectives rarely uncover dramatic revelations overnight. Progress often comes from painstaking reviews that stretch across weeks or months. A single report may be read repeatedly. Old photographs are examined with modern imaging methods. Property records, archived newspaper articles, and investigative logs are compared against one another to establish the most accurate historical record possible. In many long-running investigations across the United States, the preservation of evidence has proven decisive. Scientific capabilities have advanced significantly over the past several decades, allowing laboratories to recover and analyze biological material that would once have been considered unusable. Techniques that were unavailable during the original investigation later became standard practice, fundamentally changing how older cases could be approached. Those broader developments encouraged investigators nationwide to revisit unsolved homicides, including cases that had remained unresolved for many years. At the same time, investigators recognized that forensic science alone rarely resolves a case. Evidence must be interpreted within a broader factual framework. Physical findings gain meaning only when combined with reliable witness accounts, documented timelines, verified locations, and carefully established investigative facts. Modern technology may answer one question while raising several others, making disciplined analysis as important as scientific advancement itself. As reviews continued over the years, Deborah's case remained a reminder of the complexity inherent in homicide investigations. Every confirmed fact carried weight because it had survived repeated scrutiny. Every unresolved question reflected not a lack of effort, but the reality that some investigations encounter evidentiary limitations beyond the control of those seeking answers. For Deborah's family, however, the distinction between active and cold investigations meant little. The passage of time did not diminish the significance of the loss. Families connected to unresolved homicide cases often continue advocating for renewed attention, hoping that public awareness may encourage witnesses to come forward or prompt investigators to reconsider overlooked information. Their persistence has played a significant role in numerous historical cases, ensuring that investigations remain visible even after media coverage has faded. Communities also carry lasting memories of such crimes. Longtime residents often remember where they were when they first learned of the investigation. Those memories become part of local history, discussed whenever similar events occur or when advances in forensic science renew interest in unresolved cases. Although recollections naturally become less precise over time, they illustrate the profound impact that a single violent crime can have on an entire community. Investigators remain cautious when evaluating memories formed decades earlier. Research into eyewitness testimony consistently demonstrates that recollection changes over time, influenced by subsequent conversations, media coverage, and the simple process of remembering itself. For that reason, experienced detectives distinguish carefully between contemporaneous statements recorded during the original investigation and recollections offered many years later. Both may have value, but each must be assessed within its proper evidentiary context. Public interest in cold cases has also evolved. Advances in journalism, documentary filmmaking, and digital archives have made historical investigations more accessible than ever before. Archival newspaper reports, court records where available, and official law enforcement releases provide opportunities for renewed public engagement. In some instances, this attention has generated new investigative leads. In others, it has served primarily to preserve the historical record while reminding communities that justice remains an ongoing objective rather than a closed chapter. That distinction is essential. An unresolved homicide is not merely a historical event. It is an active search for truth conducted under legal standards requiring reliable evidence rather than speculation. Investigators must separate documented facts from rumor, probability from proof, and public theory from admissible evidence. This disciplined approach explains why some investigations require years, or even decades, to reach meaningful conclusions. Deborah Tomlinson's case continued to reflect those realities. It stood at the intersection of determined investigative work, evolving forensic science, and the enduring commitment to pursue answers regardless of how much time had elapsed. Every preserved photograph, every cataloged item of evidence, every carefully documented interview represented more than an archival record. Together, they formed a foundation upon which future investigators could continue building whenever new opportunities emerged. History offers many examples demonstrating that persistence matters. Cases once believed unsolvable have later advanced because evidence was preserved correctly and investigators refused to abandon the search for answers. Those successes have reshaped investigative philosophy across the criminal justice system, reinforcing the importance of maintaining comprehensive records and periodically reviewing unresolved homicides using contemporary scientific methods. Whether every unanswered question can ultimately be resolved remains uncertain. Some cases yield definitive conclusions, others remain incomplete despite extraordinary effort. Yet the commitment to careful documentation, objective analysis, and continued review ensures that the search for truth does not depend solely on the circumstances of the original investigation. It continues whenever evidence is re-examined, whenever new technology becomes available, and whenever investigators return to the file determined to ask one more question that had not been asked before. In that sense, Deborah Tomlinson's case became more than a single investigation. It illustrated the enduring principles that guide homicide inquiries: preserve the evidence, verify the facts, remain open to new information, and allow conclusions to emerge from demonstrable proof rather than assumption. Those principles may not provide immediate answers, but they remain the strongest safeguard against error and the most reliable path toward justice whenever the opportunity finally arises. The forest remembered long before anyone else did. Long before the police tape fluttered between the trees. Long before newspaper headlines turned a quiet logging town into the center of a national obsession. Long before detectives spent decades chasing shadows that always seemed one step ahead, Blackwood Forest kept its silence. It had seen storms level ancient pines. It had watched generations of hunters disappear beneath its endless canopy every autumn. It had hidden forgotten trails, abandoned cabins, and stories the townspeople preferred not to tell after sunset. Locals spoke about the woods with quiet respect, never fear. The forest wasn't cursed, they insisted. It was simply old. Older than memory. Older than roads. Older than the people who believed they understood it. Then one September afternoon in 1974, something entered Blackwood Forest that never came back out alive. Her name was Emily Carter. 17 years old. A senior at Blackwood High School. Honor student. Debate team captain. Weekend waitress at Miller's Diner. The kind of teenager teachers described as dependable, neighbors called polite, and friends assumed would someday leave town for college before returning only to visit during the holidays. She had a habit of planning everything. Her notebooks were color-coded. Her bedroom calendar was filled weeks in advance. She never missed family dinners without calling. She never vanished. On Friday, September 13th, the town moved through another ordinary afternoon beneath a sky washed pale blue by the first cool breath of autumn. School dismissed shortly after 3. Students spilled onto sidewalks laughing about football games, homework, and weekend plans. Pickup trucks rumbled past the campus. Bicycles raced each other toward Main Street. Parents waited outside storefronts. Nothing about the day suggested that history was quietly changing. Emily left school carrying 2 textbooks and a brown leather satchel her father had given her the previous Christmas. Several classmates remembered seeing her stop outside the front gate. She wasn't alone. A young man approached her. No argument. No raised voices. Just a brief conversation. Some witnesses would later describe him as familiar. Others insisted they had never seen him before. One remembered a dark jacket. Another was certain it was tan. The disagreement seemed insignificant at the time. Years later, investigators would return to those conflicting memories again and again, wondering whether the smallest overlooked detail had been sitting in plain sight from the very beginning. Emily smiled politely. She checked her wristwatch. Then she started walking toward Oak Ridge Road, the winding stretch of pavement that connected the school to the eastern neighborhoods bordering Blackwood Forest. It was a route she had taken countless times. Safe. Familiar. Predictable. The last confirmed sighting came at 3:42 p.m. A mail carrier noticed Emily crossing the old railway bridge while reading from a folded piece of paper. Whether it was homework, a shopping list, or something else entirely was never determined. She disappeared less than 10 minutes later. The first indication that something was wrong arrived at 6 o'clock. Dinner sat untouched. Emily's mother glanced toward the driveway every few minutes, expecting headlights to sweep across the front lawn. Her father checked the garage. Empty. By 7, concern replaced irritation. Emily had never ignored curfew. Not once.
Phone calls began. Friends.
Classmates. The diner where she worked weekends. Nobody had seen her. At least, nobody remembered seeing her after school. By 8:30, Blackwood's volunteer search team assembled in front of the sheriff's office. Flashlights, ropes, portable radios. Within an hour, nearly 80 people spread across roads, creek beds, hiking trails, and abandoned logging paths. The search continued through the night. Volunteers called Emily's name until their voices became hoarse. Dogs tracked her scent as far as Oak Ridge Road before stopping abruptly near an old gravel turnout overlooking the forest. Handlers urged them forward. The dogs circled,
Paused.
circled again, then refused to continue. Experienced deputies exchanged uneasy glances. Tracking dogs rarely abandoned a scent without reason. Either Emily had entered a vehicle, or something at that location had completely disrupted the trail. The gravel turnout immediately became the investigation's first focal point. Deputies photographed tire impressions before the arriving drizzle softened the ground. Several footprints surrounded the area. Some belonged to search volunteers. Others had been there long before darkness fell. Separating one from another would become nearly impossible. Nature had already begun erasing the story. Saturday morning transformed concern into crisis. Television stations interrupted local programming. A smiling yearbook photograph filled newspaper front pages. Missing teen. Community joins massive search. The headlines spread beyond county lines before noon. Helicopters circled above Blackwood Forest. Mounted volunteers searched narrow trails inaccessible to vehicles. Divers examined nearby ponds despite having no evidence Emily had entered the water. Every hour without answers increased the urgency. Sheriff Daniel Mercer addressed reporters outside headquarters. "We are treating this as an active missing person investigation. We ask anyone with information, regardless of how insignificant it may seem, to contact our office immediately." His words sounded measured. His eyes revealed something else. Veteran officers develop instincts difficult to explain. Mercer had investigated enough disappearances to recognize the difference between teenagers who left voluntarily and those prevented from returning. Something about Emily's disappearance felt wrong. Very wrong. Inside the temporary command center, a giant county map covered an entire wall. Colored pins marked confirmed sightings.
Blue. Green.
Yellow. The line stopped at Oak Ridge Road. Nothing beyond it could be verified. Detectives reconstructed Emily's final afternoon minute by minute. School dismissal. Conversation outside the gate. Railway bridge. Oak Ridge Road. Silence. The timeline collapsed into an empty space no one could fill. Investigators interviewed hundreds of people during the first 48 hours.
Teachers.
Students. Bus drivers. Delivery workers. Gas station attendants. Hunters. Campers. Truck drivers. Most offered sympathy. Many genuinely wanted to help. Nearly all repeated the same sentence. "I wish I'd noticed something." Then the rumors began. Someone claimed a black pickup truck had been parked near the forest entrance. Another insisted a strange man had been asking for directions earlier that week. A waitress remembered serving an unfamiliar traveler. An elderly couple reported hearing what sounded like a scream after sunset. Each tip generated hope. Each demanded manpower. Most collapsed within hours. Yet investigators couldn't ignore them. Because history had taught them a cruel lesson. Sometimes the truth hides inside the least believable story. Saturday evening brought heavy rain. The downpour washed across Blackwood Forest for nearly 6 hours. Footprints disappeared. Tire tracks softened into shapeless depressions. Whatever physical clues had survived Friday afternoon were now buried beneath mud and flowing water. The storm didn't merely complicate the search.
It rewrote the landscape.
Search coordinators expanded operations deeper into the forest despite deteriorating conditions. Volunteers formed long human chains through dense undergrowth. Every few yards they stopped. Looked. Listened. Nothing. No backpack. No books. No torn clothing. No cry for help. Just endless trees swaying beneath gray skies. The forest felt impossibly large. Each trail split into another. Each clearing opened toward another ridge. Experienced rangers admitted someone unfamiliar with the terrain could become hopelessly disoriented within minutes. Yet Emily knew these woods. She had hiked them with her father since childhood. Getting lost seemed unlikely. That realization only deepened investigators' concern. If she hadn't wandered off, someone had interrupted her journey. Sunday morning, 7:18 a.m. Volunteer searcher Carl Whitaker stepped over a fallen cedar while scanning a shallow ravine nearly 2 miles from Oak Ridge Road. At first he noticed only the satchel. Brown leather, half hidden beneath wet leaves. School books scattered nearby. One notebook lay open despite the rain. Its pages fluttered gently in the morning breeze. Whitaker called for the others. Deputies secured the area within minutes. Search dogs reacted immediately. Their handlers recognized the sudden change in behavior. Something significant was close. Very close. Investigators advanced carefully through dense brush. Every movement became deliberate. Crime scene photographers prepared their equipment before anyone disturbed the ground. Then one deputy stopped. He raised a trembling hand. Nobody spoke. About 30 yards beyond the abandoned satchel, beneath towering fir trees, lay the answer every parent fears and every investigator dreads. Emily Carter had been found. The silence that followed seemed to consume the forest itself. Even the search teams standing hundreds of yards away sensed something had changed. Radios crackled. Orders were issued. Additional personnel responded. The area expanded from a missing person search into a homicide investigation before noon. Yellow evidence markers soon dotted the clearing. Photographers documented every angle before forensic technicians entered the scene. Detectives stood at the edge of the tape, studying the landscape. No obvious weapon. No identification left behind. No message. Only scattered fragments waiting to be understood. Sheriff Mercer removed his hat. For several seconds, he stared silently across the clearing. Then he turned toward the arriving investigators. From this moment forward, he said quietly, assume every inch of this forest matters. None of them realized those words would define the next 50 years. Because somewhere beyond the trees, beyond the gathering reporters and the growing lines of police vehicles, a killer was already walking away from Blackwood Forest. Invisible. Unknown. Confident that rain had washed away every mistake. Confident that no one would ever learn what had happened beneath those ancient pines. It was a confidence that would survive decades. Until one forgotten trace, so small it escaped every investigator in 1974, would quietly wait for science to catch up. By nightfall, Blackwood Forest no longer belonged to the hunters, hikers, or loggers who had wandered its trails for generations. It belonged to the investigators. Floodlights cut through the darkness like artificial moons, casting long shadows between towering pines that seemed to stretch endlessly into the night. The rhythmic hum of portable generators echoed across the clearing as forensic photographers worked methodically, capturing every inch of the scene before a single piece of evidence could be disturbed. Every branch, every footprint, every patch of flattened grass was documented with painstaking precision. The forest had become a silent witness, and detectives intended to question every inch of it. Sheriff Daniel Mercer understood the importance of the next few hours. You only get one chance to process a crime scene, he quietly reminded his team. If they overlooked something now, they might never get another opportunity. The clearing where Emily Carter had been found measured less than 50 yards across, surrounded by dense timber on every side. From above, it was almost invisible, concealed beneath an unbroken canopy of Douglas firs. There were no marked hiking trails leading directly into it. No campsites. No nearby cabins. Anyone arriving there almost certainly knew where they were going, or had been taken there by someone who did. That single observation immediately reshaped the investigation. This no longer appeared to be a random encounter deep inside unfamiliar wilderness. The location suggested purpose. Planning. Familiarity. Detectives slowly expanded the search radius, moving outward in carefully measured circles. Teams marked every tire impression preserved beneath overhanging branches that had escaped the previous night's rain. They photographed shoe prints before covering them with protective frames. Surveyors mapped the entire area using fixed reference points so future investigators could reconstruct the scene exactly as it appeared that morning. Inside the temporary forensic tent, each recovered item was assigned its own evidence number. A broken watch. Fragments of fabric. Several strands of unidentified hair recovered from nearby vegetation. Small particles of soil collected from multiple locations. Nothing appeared extraordinary on its own. Collectively, however, every item represented another piece of a puzzle whose final image remained impossible to see. Meanwhile, investigators turned their attention back toward Oak Ridge Road. The abandoned gravel turnout suddenly became one of the most significant locations in the county. Traffic was diverted. The roadway closed. Officers conducted a meticulous daylight examination, measuring skid marks, documenting vegetation disturbed near the shoulder, and searching drainage ditches for anything overlooked during the initial nighttime search. A volunteer eventually noticed something unusual. A single earring. Silver. Partially buried beneath wet gravel. It matched the one Emily had still been wearing. Whether it had fallen naturally during a struggle or at some earlier point remained impossible to determine, but its discovery strengthened investigators' belief that whatever had happened likely began there rather than inside the forest itself. The distance between the turnout and the clearing suddenly became the most important stretch of ground in Blackwood County. Search teams walked it repeatedly. They examined broken branches, compressed undergrowth, scattered leaves. Every few yards another evidence marker appeared. Some findings proved meaningless. Others remained difficult to explain. The pattern suggested movement through terrain no ordinary traveler would have chosen voluntarily. Yet certainty remained elusive. Back at the sheriff's office, another operation unfolded with equal urgency. Interview rooms remained occupied almost continuously. Secretaries typed statements as detectives moved from one witness to the next. Every person who had spoken with Emily during her final day became part of an expanding investigative timeline. Teachers confirmed attendance. Classmates recalled casual conversations. Employees at nearby businesses attempted to remember unfamiliar customers. School records established precisely when classes ended. Bus schedules were reviewed. Telephone logs examined. Every minute mattered. One witness described seeing a dark-colored pickup truck parked near Oak Ridge Road shortly before 4 o'clock. Another insisted the vehicle had been blue. A third believed it was green. The differences frustrated investigators. Color perception changes under varying light. Memory shifts with time. Confidence does not always equal accuracy. Rather than focusing on certainty, detectives looked for overlap. Multiple independent witnesses describing a similar vehicle, even imperfectly, suggested there might indeed have been an unfamiliar truck in the area. The challenge lay in identifying it. Registration records from neighboring counties were examined. Local garages were contacted. Tow companies reviewed recent service requests. Deputies visited farms, logging companies, and construction businesses, compiling lists of similar vehicles. Hundreds of trucks. Thousands of possible owners. No immediate connection. As days passed, Blackwood transformed. Children no longer walked home alone. Parents organized neighborhood escorts. Businesses closed earlier than usual. Residents locked doors that had remained open for decades. The murder had altered something fundamental.
Trust.
People began looking at ordinary encounters differently. An unfamiliar customer at the grocery store. A stranger filling gasoline. A parked vehicle lingering too long. Everything became suspicious. Rumors spread faster than verified facts. Some insisted a drifter passing through town was responsible. Others believed someone local had committed the crime and was quietly participating in the search effort. Anonymous phone calls accused respected citizens. Old personal disputes resurfaced. Friendships fractured beneath growing suspicion. Sheriff Mercer repeatedly urged restraint during public briefings. "We need evidence," he reminded reporters. "Not assumptions." Inside the investigation, however, detectives quietly acknowledged an uncomfortable possibility. Statistically, victims are often harmed by someone they know or someone familiar with their routines. That reality required investigators to examine Emily's personal life with extraordinary care. Her family cooperated fully. Friends answered difficult questions. Teachers described her academic performance. Coworkers discussed ordinary interactions at the diner. Investigators searched for signs of conflict. A hidden relationship.
Persistent harassment.
Arguments. Threats. Financial problems. Anything capable of establishing motive. Instead, they found an image of remarkable normality. Emily's life appeared structured, predictable, and outwardly stable. That absence of obvious conflict created another problem. Without a clear motive, nearly every investigative theory remained possible. The forensic laboratory began delivering its earliest findings. Most confirmed observations already made at the scene. Some evidence could be identified. Other samples could not. Certain materials were preserved specifically because analysts believed future scientific methods might one day reveal more than current technology allowed. It was a cautious decision. No one imagined just how significant that choice would eventually become. Late one evening, Detective Helen Brooks remained alone inside the evidence room long after the rest of the building had emptied. Boxes lined metal shelves from floor to ceiling. Photographs.
Maps.
Evidence bags. Interview transcripts. She spread the crime scene images across a large table once more. Not because she expected them to change.
Because sometimes investigators did.
Fresh eyes often notice what exhausted ones overlook. She studied the photographs in silence. The position of the satchel. The scattered notebooks. Broken vegetation leading toward the clearing. Then one image caught her attention. Near the edge of a photograph, almost hidden beneath fallen pine needles, appeared what looked like a narrow impression running parallel to the ground. Too straight to be natural.
Too faint to identify.
She requested the original negative. Magnification improved visibility only slightly. It remained impossible to determine whether the mark had been made by equipment, a vehicle, or something entirely unrelated. Still, Brooks wrote a simple note across the investigative file. Revisit if additional evidence develops. It seemed insignificant. Another question among hundreds. Years later, that handwritten reminder would become unexpectedly important. Outside, autumn gradually surrendered to winter. Leaves disappeared. Snow settled across Blackwood Forest, concealing the landscape that investigators had searched so relentlessly only weeks earlier. The crime scene became inaccessible. Fresh investigative opportunities slowed. Public attention, once relentless, slowly shifted toward newer headlines. But inside the sheriff's office, the lights continued burning late into the night. Maps remained pinned to conference room walls. Witness lists expanded. Evidence logs grew thicker. The investigation had entered a new phase, one defined less by urgency than by endurance. Whoever had killed Emily Carter had left behind remarkably little.
No había eyewitness.
No straightforward trail. No simple explanation. Only fragments. Fragments that refused to fit together. And somewhere beyond the town limits, beyond the newspaper reporters and television cameras, someone watched the investigation unfold from a distance. Whether that person felt fear, relief, or absolute confidence, no detective could know. But if they believed the passage of time would bury the truth forever, they misunderstood one fundamental principle of every great cold case. Evidence may fall silent. It does not forget. And neither do the investigators who refuse to stop asking the final unanswered question. The first month after Emily Carter's murder was measured not by days, but by leads. Each morning began with fresh reports stacked across Detective Helen Brooks' desk. Anonymous phone calls, handwritten letters, claimed sightings, rumors overheard in diners, conversations repeated by neighbors who were suddenly convinced they had witnessed something important weeks earlier. Every tip carried the same possibility, that somewhere inside hundreds of ordinary observations lay the single fact capable of identifying a killer. By the end of October, the investigation had generated more than 2,000 individual leads. Most disappeared as quickly as they had arrived. A traveler reported in another state proved to be someone else entirely. A suspicious truck was linked to a delivery company with documented schedules. Several anonymous accusations collapsed after basic interviews established airtight alibis. Yet detectives refused to measure progress by the number of dead ends. Every eliminated possibility narrowed the field. Every verified timeline removed another layer of uncertainty. Sheriff Mercer often reminded younger deputies of a lesson learned over 3 decades in law enforcement. A case isn't solved because you find the right suspect. He would pause before finishing the thought. It's solved because everyone else no longer fits. That philosophy shaped every decision inside the investigation. Rather than chasing sensational theories, detectives built the case brick by brick, establishing facts that could survive scrutiny years into the future. Emily's movements were reconstructed with increasing precision. She left school at 3:17 p.m. She stopped briefly outside the front gate. She crossed the railway bridge. She walked east along Oak Ridge Road. Then the timeline ended. The unexplained gap between 3:42 and approximately 4 o'clock became the most valuable 15 minutes in Blackwood County. Detectives believed the killer had acted during that narrow window. The question was how. No evidence suggested a prolonged struggle near the roadside. Witnesses had reported no screams.
No collisions.
No obvious disturbance visible from passing traffic. That forced investigators toward 2 competing theories. The first suggested Emily willingly approached a vehicle driven by someone she recognized or trusted. The second proposed a rapid, carefully executed abduction completed before anyone nearby understood what was happening. Neither theory fully explained every known fact. Both remained possible. Investigators therefore pursued them simultaneously. Attention gradually shifted toward people whose routines intersected with Emily's daily life.
Teachers.
Neighbors. Delivery drivers. Maintenance workers. Employees at nearby businesses. Bus mechanics. Postal workers. Logging crews operating near Blackwood Forest. None were treated as suspects merely because of their occupations. Rather, Detectives sought to understand who had regular opportunities to observe Emily without attracting attention. Routine creates predictability. Predictability creates vulnerability. If someone had planned the crime, they almost certainly understood Emily's schedule long before that Friday afternoon. That realization introduced an unsettling possibility. Perhaps the killer had been watching for weeks. Perhaps longer. The investigation expanded beyond Blackwood County. State investigators compared Emily's case against unsolved disappearances throughout the region. Large maps covered conference room walls, marked with colored pins identifying similar crimes occurring within neighboring counties over the previous decade. Several appeared superficially similar. Young female victims. Remote locations. Limited physical evidence. Yet similarities alone prove very little. Patterns must withstand careful examination.
Dates.
Distances. Victimology. Methods. Opportunity. Investigators cautiously explored each comparison before reaching conclusions. Most potential connections ultimately dissolved beneath closer scrutiny. Still, one observation remained difficult to ignore. Remote wooded areas repeatedly appeared in several unrelated investigations. Whether coincidence or meaningful pattern, no one could yet determine. Meanwhile, forensic analysts continued examining the evidence collected from Blackwood Forest. Microscopes revealed fibers too small for the naked eye. Soil samples from the clearing were compared with earth recovered from Emily's shoes and clothing. Botanical specialists identified seeds and plant fragments unique to certain sections of the forest. The science of criminal investigation was evolving, but it remained painstakingly slow. Every laboratory request required time. Every conclusion demanded verification. Nothing happened as quickly as newspapers suggested. Then came the first breakthrough.
Small.
Incomplete. But real. A laboratory technician reported that several unusual synthetic fibers recovered from the crime scene appeared inconsistent with Emily's clothing. The fibers were dark in color and manufactured using a blend uncommon in everyday garments of the period. That discovery immediately raised new questions. Where had the fibers originated? An automobile? Work clothing? Outdoor equipment? Furniture? Without a known source, the evidence identified no suspect. Even so, investigators recognized its potential importance. Unlike eyewitness memories, physical evidence cannot exaggerate. It cannot become influenced by rumors. It simply exists. The fibers were carefully preserved. Years later, they would become one of the investigation's most valuable pieces of evidence. Public pressure continued mounting. National newspapers began describing Emily's murder as one of the country's most disturbing unsolved crimes. Television crews returned repeatedly to Blackwood. Every anniversary generated renewed headlines. Every press conference revived public speculation. Residents who had once welcomed reporters now avoided cameras altogether. The attention became exhausting. Businesses struggled. Tourists stopped visiting. Parents quietly discussed moving elsewhere. The town itself had become permanently associated with a single horrifying event. Blackwood was no longer known for its forests. It was known for its mystery. Inside the sheriff's office, fatigue slowly became another adversary. Detectives worked 12-hour days for weeks without meaningful rest. Coffee replaced proper meals. Conference rooms filled with cigarette smoke and stacks of investigative files. Every promising theory eventually encountered the same obstacle. Insufficient evidence. One suspect possessed opportunity, but no identifiable motive. Another displayed suspicious behavior, yet could not be placed anywhere near Oak Ridge Road. A third knew the forest intimately, but had documented movements throughout the afternoon. Each appeared compelling, until one verified fact destroyed the entire theory. The killer remained invisible. One rainy evening, Detective Brooks reopened the original search maps. She noticed something no one had discussed during recent meetings. Search teams had concentrated heavily along established trails. The killer, however, had apparently avoided them almost completely. Instead, movement reconstructed from physical evidence suggested travel through unusually difficult terrain. Dense brush, steep slopes, natural barriers most people instinctively avoided.
Why?
Brooks visited the forest again the following morning. Not with search teams. Alone. She walked slowly through the undergrowth carrying nothing more than a compass, notebook, and the original crime scene photographs. Hours passed. She followed the likely route reconstructed by investigators. Branches clawed at her jacket. Loose stones shifted beneath her boots. Visibility rarely extended beyond 30 yards. Then she stopped. Ahead lay a narrow ridgeline overlooking the clearing. From that position, someone could observe nearly every approach without being easily seen themselves. Brooks marked the location on her map. It offered no immediate answers. No forgotten evidence remained after weeks of investigation. Yet the terrain revealed something else.
Control.
Anyone familiar with these woods could move efficiently while remaining almost invisible. That required experience. Perhaps years of it. When Brooks returned to headquarters, she requested a list unlike any previously assembled. Not criminal records. Not known offenders. She wanted every person with extensive knowledge of Blackwood Forest. Forestry employees. Surveyors. Park maintenance workers. Hunters with annual permits. Retired loggers. Volunteer search and rescue personnel. Anyone who could navigate the forest without hesitation. Some colleagues questioned the request. The list contained hundreds of names. Brooks simply replied, "The forest wasn't random." That sentence lingered inside the investigation. Because if the location had been chosen deliberately, then geography itself might become the witness everyone else had overlooked. Winter settled heavily over Blackwood. Snow-buried trails beneath several feet of white silence. The clearing disappeared beneath frozen ground. Physical searches ended. The investigation shifted almost entirely indoors. Files expanded. Evidence accumulated. The suspect list grew longer before slowly becoming shorter again. Months had passed. The killer remained free. But unknown to everyone inside the sheriff's office, another story had already begun unfolding beyond county lines. Hundreds of miles away, in another quiet town where another stretch of forest bordered another lonely road, a young woman would soon vanish under circumstances chillingly similar to Emily Carter's disappearance. No one yet realized the two cases might be connected. No one recognized that the mystery of Blackwood Forest was about to become something far more terrifying. It might not be the work of one crime. It might be the beginning of a pattern. Winter released its grip on Blackwood County one slow morning at a time. Snow retreated into the shadows beneath towering pines. Streams swelled with meltwater. Logging trucks returned to the winding mountain roads, their engines breaking months of uneasy silence. To outsiders, life appeared to be finding its way back toward normal. Inside the sheriff's office, nothing felt normal. Emily Carter's photograph still occupied the center of the investigation room, surrounded by maps, witness lists, timelines, and hundreds of index cards connected by colored strings. Every detective who entered the room looked at the same smiling yearbook portrait before beginning another day chasing a killer who seemed to exist only in the spaces between confirmed facts. Then, on a quiet Tuesday morning, the telephone rang. The call came from Pine Falls, nearly 200 miles north. Another logging town. Another forest. Another missing 17-year-old girl. Her name was Sarah Bennett. She had disappeared while walking home from her part-time job at a neighborhood bookstore. Witnesses reported seeing her near the edge of a wooded service road shortly before sunset. She never reached home. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Young female. Small rural community. Forested surroundings. A disappearance without witnesses willing to say they had actually seen the crime occur. Sheriff Mercer immediately contacted investigators in Pine Falls. Within hours, reports, photographs, and preliminary evidence began arriving by courier. For 2 days, detectives from both departments worked side by side, laying documents across long conference tables. At first, the resemblance seemed striking. Then reality complicated the picture. Sarah's disappearance had occurred later in the evening. Her route differed significantly. Several physical details did not align with Emily's case. Some investigators remained convinced they were pursuing the same offender. Others urged caution. Coincidences happen. Rural communities often share similar geography, similar routines, and similar investigative challenges. Declaring a serial offender too early could distort both investigations. Mercer agreed. Facts first, he reminded everyone. Theories later. The comparison continued anyway. Every photograph was examined. Every timeline measured. Every known movement reconstructed. When Sarah's body was discovered 4 days later, investigators faced another difficult truth. There were similarities. There were also meaningful differences. Enough to prevent anyone from confidently declaring the two murders connected. The uncertainty frustrated both departments. If one person had committed both crimes, every passing day increased the danger. If the cases were unrelated, forcing them together could send investigators down the wrong path for months. The decision was made to continue exchanging information while treating each investigation independently. Blackwood returned to its own unanswered questions. Meanwhile, Detective Helen Brooks had become increasingly interested in something that rarely appeared in newspaper headlines. Behavior. Not the killer's behavior. The town's. Violent crimes change communities in predictable ways. People become cautious. Conversations become guarded. Routine changes. But Brooks noticed something else. Certain individuals seemed unusually eager to insert themselves into the investigation. Some volunteered information repeatedly. Others appeared at search headquarters almost every day despite having no official role. A few offered elaborate theories with remarkable confidence. None of that made them guilty. Experience simply taught detectives that major investigations often attract people seeking attention, significance, or proximity to dramatic events. Every recurring face was quietly documented. Not because they were suspects. Because investigators believed no observation should be discarded without examination. Among those frequent visitors was a local mechanic named Thomas Reed. 42 years old. Lifelong Blackwood resident.
Married.
No criminal record. He had volunteered during the original search and continued stopping by the sheriff's office to ask whether any progress had been made. Deputies described him as cooperative. Respectful. Helpful. Still, Brooks requested a routine interview. Reed answered every question calmly. He explained where he had been on the afternoon Emily disappeared. Named several people who could verify his movements. His timeline held together. Nothing about the conversation suggested deception. When he left, Brooks wrote 2 words across her notebook. Verified alibi. Reed was removed from the active list. Another possibility quietly closed. Days later, attention shifted towards someone entirely different. A traveling salesman had checked into a roadside motel 15 miles from Blackwood the evening before Emily vanished. He departed unexpectedly early the next morning without completing scheduled appointments. The timing appeared suspicious. State investigators located him within 48 hours. His explanation proved both unusual and completely documented. A family emergency had required him to return home overnight. Hospital records confirmed every detail. Another lead disappeared. Weeks blended into months. The evidence room continued expanding. Metal shelving filled with carefully labeled boxes. Evidence bag 014. Evidence bag 067. Photographic Series C. Interview, Volume 9. Everything preserved. Everything waiting. One afternoon, while reviewing the original search records, Brooks noticed an overlooked detail. Not evidence. Weather. The official meteorological report indicated that wind direction had shifted dramatically shortly after sunset on the evening Emily disappeared. That observation sparked a question. Search dogs had lost Emily's scent near the gravel turnout. Had changing wind conditions affected the tracking effort? She consulted canine specialists. Their answer surprised her. Weather certainly influences scent, but not enough to explain the dog's abrupt refusal to continue. Experienced tracking animals generally follow disturbances left by human movement even after environmental conditions begin changing. Unless something interrupted the trail. A vehicle, flowing water, or another factor capable of removing the scent entirely. The possibility renewed interest in Oak Ridge Road. Investigators revisited every available photograph from the turnout. High-resolution enlargements covered an entire wall. Tire impressions, boot prints, broken weeds, scattered gravel. Nothing seemed remarkable, until Brooks noticed a faint line crossing the edge of one image. Straight, narrow, almost perfectly parallel with the road. At first glance, it resembled a scratch on the photographic negative. Another detective suggested it might be the shadow of a cable. No one could determine its origin. Yet the feature appeared consistently across several photographs taken from different angles. Whatever had created it had genuinely been there. No explanation fit. Brooks labeled the photographs and placed them aside. One more unanswered question. Another fragment. Outside headquarters, public interest slowly faded. Television crews stopped visiting. National newspapers moved on. Only local reporters continued following the case with regularity. For Blackwood residents, however, forgetting proved impossible. Parents still walked children home from school. Teenagers traveled in groups. The forest acquired an unspoken reputation. People still entered it. They simply looked over their shoulders more often. Spring became summer. Summer became autumn once again. Nearly a full year had passed. Emily's murder remained unsolved. On the anniversary of her disappearance, hundreds gathered beneath the courthouse steps holding candles against the evening darkness. No speeches lasted long. No dramatic promises were made. Sheriff Mercer addressed the crowd with quiet honesty. "We have not stopped." His words carried none of the certainty people desperately wanted. Only determination. The investigation remains active. Every piece of evidence remains preserved. Every credible lead will be followed. After the crowd dispersed, Mercer remained standing alone beneath the courthouse lights. Detective Brooks joined him. "You think he's still here?" she asked quietly. Mercer looked toward the distant tree line where Blackwood Forest disappeared into darkness. "I don't know." A long silence followed. But whether he stayed,
He paused.
or whether he drove 1,000 miles away. His eyes settled on the evidence boxes being carried back inside the building. He left something behind. Brooks nodded. Not because they had found it. Because every killer did. Some left fingerprints. Others left fibers. Some left witnesses who didn't realize what they had seen until years later. And a few left nothing investigators could recognize. until science finally learned how to see it. Neither detective realized that, sealed inside one ordinary evidence envelope resting quietly on a steel shelf only 50 feet away, lay the smallest clue in the entire investigation. A clue so insignificant in 1974 that no laboratory possessed the technology to understand it. For decades, it would remain untouched, ignored, forgotten, waiting for a future no one in that room could yet imagine. 5 years passed without a single arrest. The headlines disappeared first. Then the television crews. Then the reporters who had once crowded the steps of the Blackwood County Sheriff's Office every time a new development was announced. What remained was silence. Not the peaceful silence that settles over a small mountain town after sunset, but the heavier kind, the silence created by unanswered questions. Emily Carter's murder had become part of Blackwood's identity. Children who had been too young to understand the case were now old enough to hear adults lower their voices whenever her name was mentioned. Parents still reminded teenagers not to walk alone along Oak Ridge Road. Hunters entering Blackwood Forest often paused at the old gravel turnout without realizing exactly why. The place remembered, even if people tried not to. Inside the sheriff's office, the investigation occupied an entire archive cabinet. Thousands of pages, hundreds of photographs, dozens of evidence boxes. Every interview carefully indexed. Every lead documented. Every disappointment preserved alongside every breakthrough that never became one. Detective Helen Brooks refused to let the file gather dust. Once every few months she reopened it from the beginning. Not the newest reports, the oldest ones. Experience had taught her that investigators often become trapped by their own conclusions. The longer a case remained unsolved, the more dangerous assumptions became. So she started over. Again. She reread the first witness statement. Then the second. Then the third. Hour after hour, page after page, she forced herself to ignore everything learned later and focus only on what people had actually reported during those first critical days. Patterns slowly began to emerge. Not dramatic ones. Subtle ones. Several witnesses independently described seeing an unfamiliar vehicle near Oak Ridge Road during the week before Emily disappeared. Curiously, none could agree on its exact make or color. One described a dark pickup. Another remembered a station wagon. Someone else insisted it was an older sedan. Ordinarily, such contradictions would weaken the reliability of the observation. But Brooks noticed something different. The descriptions varied. The location did not. Every account placed the unfamiliar vehicle within roughly the same quarter-mile stretch of road. Perhaps witnesses were remembering different vehicles. Or perhaps they had all seen the same one under different lighting conditions. The possibility was enough to justify another review. Investigators searched archived vehicle registrations from surrounding counties once more. Technology remained limited. Everything required manual comparison. Stacks of registration cards covered conference tables for weeks. Nothing definitive emerged. Still, Brooks refused to dismiss the coincidence entirely. Across town, life continued. New businesses opened. Families moved away. Others arrived with no knowledge of the tragedy that had shaped Blackwood only a few years earlier. For newcomers, Emily Carter was simply a name occasionally mentioned in local newspaper anniversary articles. For longtime residents, she remained unfinished history. Every September brought renewed conversations. Someone would inevitably claim they had heard something new. Another person insisted the killer had long since died. Others believed he had left the state decades earlier. Theories multiplied. Evidence did not. Then another unexpected event altered the investigation. A retired forest ranger requested a meeting. His name was Samuel Grady. He had spent nearly 40 years mapping logging routes throughout Blackwood Forest before retiring shortly after Emily's murder. At the time, detectives had interviewed him briefly. Nothing about that conversation appeared remarkable. Now, years later, he carried an old survey map folded inside a weathered leather tube. "I found this while cleaning my attic," he explained. The document revealed dozens of unofficial maintenance paths created decades before the county established formal hiking trails. Most no longer existed on modern maps. Some had disappeared beneath dense vegetation. Others had never been recorded in public records at all. Brooks studied the faded markings carefully. One abandoned trail passed within 200 yards of the original crime scene. Another connected directly to a disused logging road nearly 3 miles away. If those routes remained partially accessible in 1974, someone familiar with them could have entered and exited the forest while avoiding the more heavily traveled areas entirely. The discovery didn't identify a suspect, but it changed investigators' understanding of the terrain. The killer may not have moved randomly through Blackwood Forest. He may have followed forgotten paths invisible to almost everyone else. Search coordinators reconstructed the original volunteer search effort using the newly recovered map. An uncomfortable realization followed. Several abandoned trails had never been examined during the initial search because no one knew they existed. The oversight was understandable. The maps available in 1974 simply hadn't shown them. Even so, Brooks requested another search. Years had passed. Weather had transformed the landscape. Expectations remained modest. Small teams quietly returned to the forest. They searched old drainage channels, collapsed bridges, overgrown clearings. Most locations yielded nothing beyond rusted tools and remnants of abandoned logging equipment. Then, late one afternoon, an investigator noticed something unusual near the remains of an old wooden footbridge. A length of faded nylon cord protruded from beneath layers of leaves and soil. Carefully excavated, it proved heavily deteriorated. Too weathered to determine whether it had any connection to the homicide. Laboratory analysis later confirmed only that prolonged exposure had destroyed most identifying characteristics. Another possibility faded into uncertainty. Yet the renewed search produced something equally valuable. Perspective. Detectives finally understood just how many hidden routes existed beneath the forest canopy. The woods were not an endless maze. To someone who knew them well, they were a network. A system. A series of choices invisible to outsiders. That realization narrowed the profile investigators had quietly been developing. The offender likely possessed more than opportunity. He possessed familiarity. Perhaps professional. Perhaps recreational. But almost certainly practical. Someone comfortable moving through rugged terrain without hesitation. Someone who didn't need a map. One evening, Brooks spread 3 photographs across her desk. The gravel turnout. The crime scene. The newly discovered survey map. She stared at them for nearly an hour before drawing a single line connecting each location. The route bypassed every major trail, every campground, every scenic overlook. It favored concealment over convenience, efficiency over speed. Whoever had chosen it wasn't wandering. He was navigating. The distinction mattered. Across the hall, Sheriff Mercer entered quietly. "You've been here all night." Brooks nodded without looking up. "I keep thinking we've been asking the wrong question." Mercer folded his arms. "What question?" She tapped the map. "We've spent years asking who could have done this." A pause. "Maybe we should be asking who knew this forest well enough to disappear inside it." Mercer looked down at the faded survey lines. Neither detective spoke for several moments. Outside, rain began falling against the courthouse windows. Soft at first. then heavier. The same sound that had echoed through Blackwood Forest on the night investigators feared crucial evidence had been washed away forever. Mercer finally broke the silence. "Make the list." Brooks nodded. "Not a list of suspects. A list of knowledge. Forest employees. Survey crews. Volunteer rescue personnel. Experienced hunters. Retired loggers. Utility workers. Anyone whose work or hobbies had given them years to learn every hidden corner of Blackwood Forest. It would take months to assemble. Perhaps longer to evaluate. It wasn't a breakthrough. It wasn't even a lead. It was simply a different way of looking at the same mystery. Sometimes that is exactly how cold cases begin to move again. Not because new evidence suddenly appears, but because one investigator finally asks a question no one else thought to ask. And somewhere, beyond Blackwood County, a man who believed the past had been buried beneath decades of silence continued living an ordinary life, unaware that the investigation had quietly shifted beneath his feet. For the first time in years, the detectives were no longer chasing a ghost. They were beginning to understand the landscape the ghost had trusted to hide him. The list took almost 8 months to complete. It began as a simple spreadsheet of names. By the time Detective Helen Brooks finished, it had grown into a wall-sized chart covering nearly every profession that regularly entered Blackwood Forest during the previous decade. Loggers. Surveyors. Game wardens. Volunteer firefighters. Telephone line crews. Forest rangers. Hunters with annual permits. Retired military survival instructors. Even amateur photographers known for spending weekends deep inside the woods. More than 400 names. At first, the number felt discouraging. Then Brooks noticed something important. The purpose of the list had never been to identify the killer immediately. It was designed to eliminate people. One by one. Methodically. Every verified alibi reduced the field. Every confirmed relocation removed another possibility. Every deceased individual narrowed the investigation further. Slowly, the impossible became manageable. Detectives divided the names into categories based on opportunity, familiarity with the terrain, and documented whereabouts during the week Emily disappeared. The process was tedious. Entire days passed without a single meaningful development. Still, no one complained. Cold cases were won through persistence, not speed. One rainy afternoon, Deputy Mark Ellison arrived carrying several dusty archive boxes borrowed from the county planning office. Inside were aerial photographs taken during a government forestry survey in the early 1970s. Black and white images. Grainy. Far from perfect. Yet they offered something investigators had never possessed before. A view from above. The photographs were spread across a large drafting table. Magnifying lenses revealed forgotten logging roads, temporary bridges, and clearings that had vanished beneath decades of new growth. One image immediately captured Brooks' attention. Less than half a mile west of the crime scene stood a small maintenance shed that no longer existed. County records showed it had been demolished in 1976 after storm damage. Few people remembered it. Fewer still remembered who had access. Brooks requested the maintenance logs. 3 days later they arrived. The shed had been used jointly by forestry crews and utility contractors. Employees signed keys in and out. Repair schedules. Fuel deliveries. Equipment inventories. Nothing extraordinary. Until one entry stopped her cold. The lock had been replaced only 2 weeks before Emily disappeared. Reason listed. Unauthorized duplicate key reported. No further explanation. The report contained no names. No follow-up investigation. Only a brief notation before routine business resumed. Brooks stared at the page for several minutes. Someone had copied a key. Someone had access to a remote building hidden inside Blackwood Forest. Whether it had any connection to Emily's murder remained entirely unknown. But for the first time in years, investigators possessed something tangible that had never been fully explored. Sheriff Mercer authorized another review. Former employees were located. Retired supervisors interviewed. Most remembered little. Nearly a decade had passed. Paperwork faded. Memories faded faster. One retired maintenance foreman offered a detail absent from every official report. The shed wasn't important, he explained. But the road was. What do you mean? Most people didn't know it existed. He pointed toward an old county map. The logging companies used the main access roads. Our crews used the maintenance road. Brooks followed his finger. The narrow service route curved behind a ridge before connecting with an abandoned fire break. It eventually joined one of the forgotten trails Samuel Grady had identified months earlier. The route bypassed almost every location searched during the first 72 hours after Emily disappeared. A chill settled over the room. The pieces still didn't fit, but they were beginning to touch. Meanwhile, advances in forensic science were slowly changing investigative philosophy across the country. Crime laboratories introduced new methods for preserving microscopic evidence. Fiber comparison techniques improved. Chemical analysis became more sophisticated. Cases once considered exhausted were quietly returning to active review. Blackwood was no exception. Evidence preserved since 1974 was carefully unpacked. Each envelope inspected. Each seal documented. Technicians examined the contents under equipment unavailable during the original investigation. Most findings confirmed earlier conclusions. Nothing revolutionary emerged. Even so, analysts repeatedly praised one decision made by the original investigators. They had preserved everything. Items once dismissed as insignificant now possessed renewed value simply because they still existed. Brooks often reflected on that fact. Justice sometimes depended less on brilliant discoveries than on ordinary discipline. Someone decades earlier had resisted throwing away what appeared to be meaningless debris. Now those same fragments represented possibility. Across town, Blackwood continued changing. The old movie theater closed. The railway station became a museum. Children who had once searched for Emily with their parents were now raising families of their own. Only the forest remained essentially unchanged. The same towering pines. The same hidden ravines. The same silence. Every anniversary, Brooks returned alone. She parked near Oak Ridge Road and walked without speaking. Not because she expected to find forgotten evidence. Because she believed investigators should remember places, not just paperwork. Crime scenes tell stories that reports cannot. The slope of the ground. The visibility between trees. The sound of distant traffic. The way afternoon sunlight disappears earlier beneath a dense canopy. None of it appeared inside official files. Yet all of it mattered. On one such visit, she paused beside the old gravel turnout. Decades of weather had altered almost everything. Grass covered the shoulder. The original tire impressions had long vanished. Nearby, a young maple tree had grown where investigators once erected floodlights. Time had reclaimed the landscape. Brooks closed her notebook. Something continued bothering her. If the killer knew the forest as well as investigators now suspected, why risk approaching Emily near a public road? There had to be easier opportunities deeper inside the woods. Unless the road itself had been part of the plan. The thought lingered. She drove back to headquarters without saying a word. That evening she spread the timeline across her desk once more. School dismissal. Railway bridge. Oak Ridge Road. Disappearance. She removed every assumption, every theory, every opinion accumulated over the years. Only confirmed facts remained. The empty space between 3:42 and 4 o'clock suddenly looked different. Not because new evidence had appeared, because the timeline suggested remarkable efficiency. Whoever intercepted Emily acted quickly,
Confidently.
without hesitation. That level of confidence rarely belongs to someone improvising. It belongs to someone expecting events to unfold exactly as they did. Brooks underlined 3 words in red ink. Preparation. The investigation had spent years focusing on opportunity. Perhaps preparation deserved equal attention. She began assembling another list. Not people who knew the forest. People who routinely plan logistics. Survey coordinators. Maintenance supervisors. Route inspectors. Delivery schedulers. Individuals whose professions required anticipating movement, timing, and access. Mercer entered her office just before midnight. "You started another list." Brooks smiled faintly. "I think our killer liked routines." Mercer looked at the papers covering her desk. So did Emily. The room fell quiet. That observation carried unexpected weight. If Emily lived predictably, someone could predict her. Someone could know when she left school, which road she preferred, how long she walked alone. Preparation required observation. Observation required time. For the first time, the investigation seriously considered that Emily may not have been chosen at random. Perhaps she had been watched.
Days.
Weeks. Maybe even months. Outside the office windows, another autumn storm rolled across Blackwood County. Thunder echoed beyond the mountains. Rain swept through the streets. Inside the evidence room, sealed inside an ordinary cardboard box labeled simply Case File BC 74-0913, dozens of preserved items rested exactly where they had been placed years earlier. One tiny fragment, smaller than a fingernail, overlooked in countless reviews, remained catalogued, protected, and unexplained. No detective noticed it that night. No laboratory possessed the technology to reveal its full significance. But history was moving. Science was advancing. And somewhere in the years ahead, that forgotten fragment would stop being just another piece of evidence. It would become the thread that unraveled everything the killer believed time had buried forever. 48 years had changed almost everything. The sheriff's office had been renovated twice. The old interview rooms with their wood-paneled walls had been replaced by digital recording suites. Shelves once overflowing with paper files now stood beside secure servers capable of storing millions of pages of evidence. Typewriters had disappeared. Film cameras had become museum pieces. Investigators who had worked Emily Carter's case were either retired, scattered across the country, or remembered only through photographs hanging quietly in the department hallway. Only one thing refused to change. Case BC 74-0913 remained open. The cardboard evidence boxes had faded from decades of storage, their corners softened by time, but every seal remained intact. Every chain of custody record had been preserved. Every photograph, every laboratory report, every interview transcript still waited exactly where the previous generation had left them. To most people, Emily Carter's murder belonged to history. To Detective Maya Bennett, it belonged to Monday morning. At 36, Bennett represented a generation of investigators raised in an era where technology could uncover answers that earlier detectives had never imagined possible. She respected the work done decades before her arrival, but she also understood a simple truth shared by every cold case unit across the country. Evidence never becomes older. Only the tools improve. Her assignment appeared straightforward. Review the county's oldest unsolved homicide. Determine whether advances in forensic science, justified another examination. Prepare a recommendation. What began as administrative routine quietly evolved into something far more significant. Bennett refused to start with theories. She started with chronology. For nearly 2 weeks, she read every document in strict chronological order, resisting the temptation to skip ahead toward later conclusions. She wanted to experience the investigation exactly as it had unfolded in 1974. The urgency, the uncertainty, the frustration. She came away with profound admiration for the original detectives. Working without modern databases, digital mapping, surveillance cameras, or DNA technology, they had documented the case with extraordinary discipline. Their reports were meticulous, their evidence logs remarkably complete. They had preserved items many agencies during that era might have discarded as insignificant. That decision now offered possibilities no one in 1974 could reasonably have anticipated. The county approved a comprehensive forensic review. Every preserved item would be photographed again using modern imaging systems before any additional testing occurred. Evidence technicians unpacked each container inside a climate-controlled laboratory. Gloves changed constantly. Work surfaces were sterilized repeatedly. Every movement was documented. Nothing could be rushed. One by one, items collected nearly half a century earlier emerged beneath bright laboratory lights. Emily's satchel, her notebooks, recovered fibers, fragments of vegetation, soil samples, personal belongings. Each object represented a conversation across generations between investigators separated by almost 50 years. The original detectives had protected the evidence. The new generation would ask new questions. Among the archived materials, one envelope immediately attracted attention. Its label was unremarkable. Trace material, item 47. The accompanying report from 1974 described only microscopic synthetic fibers of undetermined origin. At the time, analysts could identify little beyond basic composition. Technology simply had not advanced far enough. Now, forensic scientists approached the material differently. High-resolution microscopy revealed structural details impossible to observe decades earlier. Without drawing immediate conclusions, analysts documented every measurable characteristic before comparing the fibers against modern reference collections. The work proceeded cautiously. Science rewards patience. Premature conclusions have ended countless investigations. Weeks passed. Bennett avoided speculation. She understood that renewed testing often confirms previous findings rather than overturning them. Still, something about the evidence room felt different. Not because dramatic discoveries appeared overnight. Because every preserved item represented unrealized potential. Across the country, similar reviews had solved long-forgotten cases through persistence rather than luck. The Blackwood investigation deserved the same opportunity. While laboratory work continued, Bennett revisited the physical landscape. Blackwood Forest looked different from the photographs taken in 1974. Trees had matured. Some logging roads had disappeared beneath dense undergrowth. Others had become official hiking trails. Yet the terrain itself remained remarkably familiar. Standing near the old gravel turnout, Bennett compared historical aerial photographs with modern satellite imagery. One feature immediately stood out. Natural contours had changed very little. Visibility remained limited. The forgotten maintenance routes identified decades earlier still followed the easiest passages through difficult terrain. The observations reinforced conclusions reached by Detective Helen Brooks many years before. The location had almost certainly been selected by someone familiar with the forest. Back at headquarters, Bennett discovered another remarkable aspect of the investigation. Brooks had left extensive handwritten notebooks documenting every unanswered question she believed future investigators should revisit when technology improved. The notebooks contained no sensational theories, only disciplined observations. Items requiring additional testing. Witnesses whose statements deserved renewed comparison. Locations worth remapping. Questions science had been unable to answer during her career. Bennett spent several evenings reading them carefully. The pages reflected humility rather than certainty. Again and again Brooks had written variations of the same sentence. Do not assume. Verify. Those 3 words became Bennett's guiding principle. Public interest in Emily Carter's case quietly returned after the sheriff's office announced a forensic review. Local newspapers published retrospective articles examining the investigation's history. Residents who had grown up hearing the story shared faded memories with younger family members. Some former witnesses contacted investigators voluntarily, offering recollections recorded decades earlier in personal diaries or family letters. Bennett welcomed every conversation while recognizing the limitations of memory. Time changes recollection. Documents recorded closest to an event generally remain more reliable than memories formed many decades later. Accordingly, every new interview was compared against contemporaneous records rather than replacing them. The goal remained unchanged. Separate documented fact from retrospective interpretation. One afternoon, the laboratory requested Bennett's presence. Not because the case had suddenly been solved, because analysts had completed the first stage of their review. Their preliminary findings confirmed that several preserved trace materials possessed characteristics warranting additional examination using specialized techniques unavailable during previous decades. The announcement was measured, careful, exactly as science demands.
No conclusions. No accusations.
Only evidence suggesting that further analysis might prove informative. For Bennett, that was enough. The investigation had moved. Not dramatically. Not publicly. But measurably. For the first time in many years, progress depended less upon finding new evidence than upon understanding preserved evidence more completely. She returned to the archive room that evening after everyone else had gone home. Rows of labeled boxes stretched quietly before her. Thousands of pages. Hundreds of photographs. Generations of determination preserved inside ordinary cardboard. She paused before the original evidence shelf. Someone in 1974 had carefully sealed these materials, believing that one day they might matter again. Someone in the 1980s had refused to authorize their destruction. Someone in the 1990s had ensured climate-controlled storage. Someone in the early 2000s had digitized every investigative record. None of those decisions attracted headlines. Yet together, they created the possibility, now unfolding. Cold cases are rarely solved by a single detective. They are solved by decades of persistence shared across generations. As Bennett switched off the archive lights, she understood she had inherited far more than an investigation. She had inherited a promise. A promise made by every investigator who had ever opened case BC 74-0913. That time would never become an excuse for surrender. That evidence would continue speaking as long as someone remained willing to listen. And somewhere inside the laboratory, beneath the objective gaze of modern forensic instruments, the smallest preserved traces from Blackwood Forest were beginning to reveal details they had kept hidden for nearly half a century, not because they had changed, but because science had finally learned how to ask better questions.